Good afternoon, everyone. If you can have a seat, it'd be appreciated. I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow and Director for the Center for Community Uplift, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Building Inclusive Economies, How Community Finance Fuels Black Business Expansion. And I'm going to start off this brief introduction to this wonderful panel by showing a little bit of good news. So we could go to the slides. This is a chart of number and rate change of Black-owned businesses since 2017 through 2022. As you can see, from the first term of the Trump administration through the pandemic, through part of the Biden administration, we've seen growth in employer-owned firms. Why is this important? First, I wanted to share a little bit of wealth data. We know that there are wealth disparities in this country. On the average median wealth for Black families, about $45,000, white Hispanics, $62,000, whites, $285,000, and that dreaded other group. When I say dreaded, it's a mishmash of groups, but it's $536,000 in median wealth. So going back to employer firms, why is that important? On this chart, we look at the median net worth of working adults by business ownership. And if you look in that left column, Black, Hispanic versus non-Hispanic white, you see that the wealth of individuals, working adults, about $52,000 for Black people. For non-employer firms, so sole proprietorships, it's about $218,000. But for employer owners, it's $537,000. And in general, employer firms are about have 5 times the wealth as their counterparts. So employer firms with more than one employee are a significant factor in changing these numbers here. Now, I want to show you another thing. When you're talking about the finance world, there's really only 2 things. There's equity and there's debt, right? And so if you don't have equity, guess what you got to do? You got to pursue debt. I want to have you take a look at this chart that looks at lending consideration outcomes for white and Black owners. And I want to put your attention on that area, that middle row, loans always approved. And we're going to look at the differences along credit score. For all credit scores, you see the difference, 68% to 22% essentially. But when you look at and this is based on survey data, outcomes based upon below median credit score, you see white owners, 62% of them getting approved versus 11%. But this other category is just amazing to me. When you look at credit scores above the 75th percentile, about 72% of Black business owners get approved for a loan versus 25%. And so this leads into a discussion that we're having today. We have to look at those institutions' lending practices to see if people who are worthy of investment are getting the dollars they need to expand their communities. And we're going to have a focus on community development financial institutions. As we know, these are mission-driven lenders and financial institutions that provide affordable credit to underserved communities. They put a focus on community development. They may provide more flexible underwriting, lower cost loans, and targeted products in neighborhoods underserved by mainstream banks. And we're going to take a look at a group of CDFIs and financial institutions that are really taking charge in this area. Now, in my research, I've learned that all CDFIs are not alike, right? In general, they are mission driven, but some do the business of changing those wealth dynamics for communities better than others. And so we're going to look at this group Expanding Business Credit Consortium. They provide capital to Black entrepreneurs and Black-led community and social service organizations. It was formed in 2016 as a peer learning network of community development financial institutions sharing best practices in lending to Black businesses. Now, obviously, they also lend to other groups, but they have a great understanding of how to get it done when it comes to Black business owners, Black developers, people who are focused on affordable housing, people who are focused on home ownership. This is a group that has done significant work, and we want to learn from them. We're going to do it in a panel discussion. So at this time, I would like to invite my panelists on the stage, and as I introduce them. First, I'm going to introduce Melissa Bradley, who's going to be our illustrious moderator. She's a distinguished professor of practice at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University, general partner at 1863 Ventures and the BEA Venture Fund, and manager director of the entrepreneurship initiatives at the Black Economic Alliance Foundation. Renowned entrepreneur and two-time exited founder, her vision is to foster responsible entrepreneurship, reshape and support the narrative around new majority founders, and drive meaningful change in the entrepreneurial landscape. Please give it a round of applause for Professor Bradley. No, I'm not kidding. This person is a giant in his field. Bill Bynum, William J. Bill Bynum, is the founding chief executive officer of Hope Enterprise, Hope Credit Union, Hope Enterprise Corporation, Hope Credit Union, and Hope Policy Institute, a family of organizations dedicated to strengthening the financial health of people in under-resourced Deep South communities. Since 1994, Hope's efforts have benefited more than 3 million people in Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, while shaping policies and practices that improve conditions in opportunity deserts nationwide. Please give a round to Bill Bynum. And last but not least, Brian E. Argrett is the Director and Chief Executive Officer of City First Bank since 2011. Effective April 1st, 2023, he became the chair of the company and the bank. Formerly, Mr. Argrett was the founder and management partner of Fulcrum Capital Group, an investment manager, and Fulcrum Capital Partners, LP, an institutionally backed private equity limited partnership. He also served as president, Chief Executive Officer, and Director of Fulcrum Venture Capital Corporation, a lot of words there, and a federally licensed and regulated small business investment company. Was also presidential appointee to the Community Development Advisory Board of the U.S. Treasury Department under the Obama administration. And I will join the panel as well. So let's give a round of applause.
Give it up for Andre. First, let me say thank you for joining us here in person and online. We recognize we're in the middle of the day, but hopefully catching you after lunch. I just want to thank Andre and his team for inviting me. The last time I was in this building was many, many years ago when I was a non-resident fellow, so it is good to be back. I want to cut to the chase, recognizing that those in the room and those who are watching may or may not have heard of CDFIs, like many of the entrepreneurs that look like me, where when surveyed for a research study we did around Beyond 5 of what are those businesses doing after 5 years, 90% said they counted on non-banks and people like you. So let's just start with the basics. There's about over 1,000 CDFIs, but less than 500 minority depository institutions. So the power exists, but how many people have heard of CDFIs? This is probably a trick question because all of you probably are. But if I were to ask online, I bet you it would not be the same. So let's just start with you about what is a CDFI and why is it so important?
Sure. So a CDFI is a community development financial institution which can take 4 different forms. This is important. It could be a depository that is a commercial bank. It could be a credit union. It could be a nonprofit loan fund, or it could actually be a venture fund, as you well know. So what's in common around them is that they're all licensed by Treasury and have essentially committed to doing deep mission work, with over 60% of their activities being invested in low and moderate income communities. That, at the nutshell, that's what they are.
So, Bill, when we think about, you've been at this for a long time, I'm a big fan. Talk about some of the nuances of what CDFIs and in their all shapes and maturations can do. And what are those specific sectors and or types of capital where you all are much more innovative than, say, than a traditional bank?
You know, I think the point that Brian made about the concentration of financing in certain places, and I'd say to certain populations, is really where CDFIs lean in best. And the truth is, CDFIs preceded the onset of the Treasury program. They've been around for many, many years. Small loan funds, community development corporations, the organizations that have recognized gaps in markets that are not adequately served by traditional financial institutions. And so wherever there's a need to provide resources to advance the economy, at some point capital comes into place. And you just don't want that capital to come from petty lenders and check cashers and pawn shops. But in some places, that's all that exists. And you know, banks go where traditional banks go where they can make money for their shareholders. Fortunately, CDFIs, we have to pay the bills, but we also have a mission, bottom line, and that mission varies for CDFIs. And in the case of the Expanded Black Business Credit Consortium, we do many things, but we are a group of some of the strongest lenders to black businesses in the country, and that's because that's the need that exists in the markets we serve. We all serve not just minority businesses. I'm in the Delta. I started in the Delta region of Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Now we work across the Deep South in Alabama, and Tennessee, and Georgia. And there are a lot of rural communities, a lot of urban communities that need capital, and we go where the gaps exist, and we want to make sure that those borrowers, those communities, are not subjected to irresponsible, overpriced capital that does more harm than good.
Sure. So you both have laid out, I think, a compelling argument of the value of CDFIs. But Andre, I want you to talk about the correlation of their presence based on region, right? We know that not all funders and not all entrepreneurs are the same.
Well, this really was highlighted during the pandemic when the then Trump administration released the PPP loan program. We knew structurally that many black people, black communities, brown communities could not access those the immediate onset of those programs because they were not involved with mainstream banks. But we really did see CDFIs taking the lead in getting capital to those individuals in those communities. Now, most, like CDFI, like a lot of community-facing banks, they're more high touch than volume. But we did see with increased capital, they did a lot of the lion's share of work in terms of making sure that capital got out to different communities. And you saw this pop in different regions. Wherever you saw a CDFI, you saw lending happening. And just to close that out, we did see a rise, as you saw in the data, a rise in business development. And I was somewhat surprised that I thought there was going to be a trailing off immediately after the pandemic. But we saw a continuation of growth. So many of those investments were good bets, essentially. That those investments led to the expansion of businesses in those regions, and they're still existing. So we have to figure out, and this is partially my job as a researcher, what's that secret sauce? And so that's what I want to learn from these folks.
Just to jump in, so I don't know if it's the complete secret sauce, but one of the things that is very unique about CDFIs is both that they're rooted in the communities they serve. So they're of the communities culturally, physically, and in every way. And then there's an intention to serve that very specific community. So that's what you saw in PPP, right? We're already in the community. These are our customers, our neighbors, who are not necessarily getting access when it was a customer first mentality on who could access PPP loans. And so that's why you saw the CDFIs step up so dramatically to be able to service those communities. And you see it with every day, and also why you saw the continuation. We're literally in the communities designing solutions that address the capital access gaps within those communities.
But Melissa, can I just
Please.
piggyback on that? I think it's also became very clear during PPP the incredible value that CDFIs bring. In the initial round of that $800 billion program, CDFIs were not eligible to participate.
Right.
But a lot of advocacy occurred, and the program opened up. This was during the Trump administration, and it was a bipartisan effort to open up the windows so that more businesses could get and communities could get access, because 40% of all black-owned businesses failed, I think, during the pandemic, and that's just a devastating trauma on those communities. But I think banks have recognized that CDFIs go beyond what they do. It's the secret part of the secret sauce is the non-financial. It's the time we take to structure. It's what is it? Bailey's Savings and Loan. We just don't put them in an algorithm and spit them out. We take the time and understand what the business's needs are, and then structure a solution to get them responsible access to credit. And banks know that that's not what their models do. And so increasingly, they see CDFIs as an extension of the financial institution. It's not banks, traditional banks versus CDFIs. This is part of the financial system that is necessary for the economy to work.
So I know y'all got a lot to say. I want to try to get it in, but I want to just move past this because I want to close out what I'm calling CDFI 101, which is you've both touched upon the uniqueness. Let's make that concrete. Give some examples of that non-financial assistance, the diversity of capital stacks, and any other things that you are able to do that banks aren't able to do while still mitigating risk. Brian?
Well, I'll start. So we are a commercial bank, so we have to mitigate risk in the same way that every other OCC bank would need to do. But what we're able to do, for example, with our nonprofit affiliate partner, is we're able to do a loan in conjunction with them that will have a higher loan-to-value ratio, meaning less equity, to reach a single customer and thus delivering more value to that customer to be able to purchase a building or to finance their business going forward. So part of that creativity is what we were alluding to earlier that CDFIs bring to the table. So we'll take more risk in the sense that more perceived risk, but because we understand the borrower, we're close to the borrower, we understand the community, it may not be actual risk. And it shows up, as I think the data will show and has shown, with very low default rates existing within the CDFI space. Actually, one really interesting one, Bill was talking about the consortium of the 8 CDFIs in the Black Vision Fund, which is an outgrowth of the Expanded Black Business Credit Initiative. So you had loans to the fund that then were lending to CDFIs that were focused on business growth within the Black communities. 0 defaults in those loans to that fund, right? So that tells you that those lenders have figured out a way to extend credit in increasing amounts, but do so safely and do so with great penetration and lower risk.
So there's a model that can be followed. So I want to go to you, Andre, and then Bill, I'm going to come to you with a similar question. But let's talk about public-private partnerships, because essentially what you gentlemen are teeing up is this ecosystem by which Black business owners, whether they're developers or CPG, consumer product goods companies, can leverage. Talk about research around the value and kind of the exponential of public-private partnerships, or anecdotal public-private partnerships.
Well, I'm involved in a group of universities who are seeking to do community development in their neighborhoods, particularly some historically Black colleges and universities who are seeking to develop the neighborhoods around them. Black neighborhoods are treated like Black people. Black institutions are treated like Black people. Because of less wealth, and I said this before, if you can't get equity, you have to get debt. Now, here's the issue. Black institutions require the debt, but they also need equity. they absolutely need equity. And so when you're doing deals, and particularly, and they can explain this far greater than I can, you need a diverse set of funders, a diverse set of capital sources that provides the relief and equity that these institutions need. But being realistic, you just need the amount of resources to cover the developments overall. And so it's important that CDFIs can leverage other institutional capital in a way that will provide equity for those institutions and people. And so there are many different ways, and I know my colleagues here can explain it, but you almost have to have a blend of equity and debt in order to get the things done that we're talking about.
So, Bill, I would love for you to ground us in an example of public-private partnerships. You've been in the South a long time, way before everybody realized that's where we should be. Can you give an example of how you've been able to diversify capital stacks and leverage partners to serve your community?
No, it's interesting. I am increasingly talking about Hope, my organization, as a community development investment bank. When you think of Goldman Sachs, they target a certain segment of customers. It's very different from the customers that we serve in CDFIs, but our customers need the same thing. Goldman Sachs provides investment, and then they find other capital to help build the capital stack. And they also provide advisory services to help those customers use the free resources effectively. When you think about low-income people in communities, particularly communities of color, they may not have easy access to a lawyer in their country club or a banker or an accountant in their church. And so, but they need those same resources, they need those same tools. And so at Hope and at other CDFIs, we provide financing, and we use the whole alphabet soup of government programs to the extent they're available, whether it's Small Business Administration, whether it is USDA guarantees. But it's also interesting that banks have also stepped in, and foundations providing credit enhancements and low-cost capital to help us structure capital that is affordable and it helps that business get traction and grow. And we combine that again with the advisory services, whether we provide them ourselves or we partner with a small business development center. We partner with HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, who are often located in these under-resourced communities, and they may provide accounting support or market opportunities for the businesses. And so putting together all those resources to help the business get traction and then start to grow is something that is unique to CDFIs. And when you think about all that requires, it's hard for a bank to do that. Often when these loans are smaller, when they're perceived as higher risk, they tend to gravitate toward the more profitable transactions. But the communities, and in an increasingly diverse economy where the majority population is diverse, we need to make sure that all of those businesses and communities get access to the tools they need to prosper.
So, Brian, underlying this conversation is the role of policy. And so I would love for you to talk about what policies, federal, state, local, have been useful, which ones are needed, and for the researchers, which ones need to be explored that could be helpful in unlocking capital and better serving these businesses.
To answer that, I want to go back a little bit to tying in two pieces here that my colleagues spoke on. So we spoke about the amount of wealth, if you will, or the capital differences that we hold on our community balance sheets and our individual balance sheets. And we have to understand that that then translates into our business balance sheets, right? Either what we're starting with or what we need to grow and expand. So I just wanted to make sure we have that direct correlation between the charts that you put up and what black businesses are facing every day. And so the secret sauce, back to that, is something Bill talked about. One of the big components is our job, and what CDFIs do extraordinarily well is we go and cobble together what should be the equity to help finance that business. And so we used an example earlier of that, but it literally comes from the public sources, the philanthropic sources, and of course of the commercial sources. And so Bill mentioned a few of those, right? So from on the corporate side, you might have programmatic or some of the commercial banks that may be participating through CRA, for example, or other ways to help fund the underlying communities. You may have the philanthropic space. So you may take one of the large foundations that has come and made large grants in CDFIs to propel their work forward. And then, of course, you cannot forget the government portion of that, which is both at the federal level, be it something like the SBA program, the CDFI program, USDA programs, all of the programs that are focused on gaps in business growth positively impact the CDFIs and the communities that they're serving. But then you also have to go down to the state and municipal levels, where there may be in the city of Los Angeles a big focus on affordable housing that has dollars associated with it. Again, the CDFIs are those unique institutions that come and cobble together, is the word I always use, all those different sources to be able to make that business move forward and get their funding received. And I think that's part of what Bill was alluding to.
And you know, at a very basic level, I study discrimination and its relation to risk. What I think that CDFIs and other financial institutions that get it, they don't see people as the risk. They understand the past policy that created risk for people, that created damages that would not otherwise, we would be lending to the folks all the time. And so whether it's that proximity to people that gives people the lens, or just basic understanding of how past policy impacted the distribution of resources, CDFIs, at least from what I'm seeing, some of them, let's say some of them, because others are just like, they function just like banks that see people as risky. But when there's an awareness, then there's a way to invest in the people who are worthy of the investment.
So Bill, let me ask you that, because I want to call out one historical thing. We think about the GI Bill. Yeah. Did not allow everybody to buy a home, right? Which tends to be the underlying asset when people go borrow. So I want you to talk a little bit, Bill, about risk and how you're managing risk, because I think to Andre's point, and what I see in working with founders, everybody just assumes Black founders are risky, not understanding that they don't have the same access to capital, that it costs them more. So can you talk about either specifically how you're underwriting, or what would a message be to others who are underwriting that they should understand the risk profile of Black founders across sectors? And you both alluded to what are some of the successes that would combat those negative stereotypes?
I think there's real risk and there's perceived risk, and I think the challenge with how the communities and people that CDFIs target is that the risk is overstated. Our portfolio performance within EBBC businesses is comparable to any traditional financial institution, and it's because we take the time to analyze. We're not giving money away. We expect we have to get a return.
This is not philanthropic.
We have to pay our bills. We have to return or pay our investors. And so we have to run very sophisticated operations. And whether you're a credit union, a bank, a loan fund, a ventures fund, a regional or a local CDFI, you have those same needs to navigate. And we do that by taking the time to not put the borrower into a computer and spit it out, because that would exclude so many because of the data that you shared, the wealth disparities, the lack of collateral, the lack of traditional experience. And in many cases, you have founders, you have entrepreneurs who know how to make the widget. They probably have been doing the bulk of the work in some of these companies, but they have not had the opportunity to take the ownership. And so structuring the capital in a way that can help them get out of the gate, and whether it's using, again, SBA guarantees, using a blended source of capital. We use new market tax credits. We use USDA guarantees. Some foundations occasionally provide support. And we've had some really exciting public programs, Small Business Capital Investment, SSBCI Capital Initiative, which was a major program that came out after the pandemic, has sparked investment in thousands and thousands of small businesses that both banks and CDFIs have used to mitigate the risk and help the businesses get stronger and more bankable. And so we take the time to both structure the right capital stack and also provide the advisory services, connecting them with expertise to help mitigate the risk. When we underwrite the loans, there are going to be deficiencies. That's the case with any businesses, and you have to structure the financing to mitigate those deficiencies, and we take the time to do that.
Welcome. Take a question that came in via the internet. When we talk about these diverse capital stacks, clearly you have to have the right capital to manage risk. And so someone specifically wanted to understand, where do CDFIs sit and how do you support startups? I want to move to more employer businesses, but talk about how you've been able to support startups.
So let me take
Yes, please.
So let's go back to debt and equity. So just as a starting point, most of your CDFIs are providing debt as opposed to equity, and so you still have to solve that equity piece. So some of the CDFIs are reaching down, as we were talking about earlier, to figure out how you close that equity gap, but understand it's there, right? So your CDFI venture firms step into that gap on equity, and again, some of the CDFI loan funds and credit unions and banks figure it out, how to get equity. Matter of fact, we were upstairs in a conversation earlier today with a equity-like tool for Black developers that would help in a most critical portion of the financing pre-development. This is a hard place to plug, and yet we're sitting around the table with colleagues trying to figure out and designing a product that could actually work. And then we'll test it out, and we'll see you all later with some results that we believe will be incredibly
But
positive.
think about how important that tool could be in the housing crisis that we're facing in this country. We need more affordable housing stock, and that is both addressing a critical need for stabilizing communities, but it's also a way to get emerging developers in a position to build wealth, to start. And what is owning property and generating revenue from that is something that a whole lot of people have used to help climb the economic ladder. I can think of some people here in Washington who have done quite well as real estate developers.
Correct.
And so we want to extend that same opportunity to small emerging developers who are often don't have access to the equity. So this equity-like tool that we're piloting, we're really excited about it, and we think it can both help build wealth where wealth has been extracted and not allowed to grow, but also address a critical need in the economy.
And it goes without saying, but developers are so important in our communities. But it's one of those games. If you don't have wealth, you cannot play the game. Right. And so if you don't figure out this equity problem, it's going to be hard to step into that kind of role.
Yeah. Recognizing the audience, probably policymakers, investors, founders, ecosystem leaders, we've talked a little bit about the financial piece. I want each of you to talk about the role of non-financial support. So Bill, you talked about technical assistance. You've talked a little bit about relationships and getting people in the room. Obviously there's research. Talk about that, because I think some people say, well, I don't have any money. How can I be helpful in this? And to all of your points, it's pretty significant that we start focusing on these businesses because they really have economic impact on how well we do as a country. So I'd just love to hear the non-financial pieces. And we'll start with you, Brian.
So there's a couple angles that I think about that. One is developing an understanding of both the nature of the problem, how significant it is from an equity standpoint, and then what are the tools that you can start to support, either from a public policy standpoint or even in your own shop, whatever you might do, to begin to think about how do we solve this problem. So that's kind of a broad answer, but we all have votes. We all have advocacy at our core, and our institutions can stand up for things that we care about. I wanted to also say at the institutional level, and I was thinking about you, Melissa, because you've been a venture capitalist, right? And so a lot of what CDFIs do with a different return profile is the same thing that smart money VCs do. We're looking at a business that has some gaps, and we're trying to figure out how to supplement those gaps. So Bill mentioned, well, you don't know the person at the country club who could provide X, Y, and Z. So a lot of times the CDFIs are stepping into a community or a business owner and trying to say, how do I bridge that? It may be technical assistance. Well, I've been a great widget maker and I can sell, your socks off or whatever, but I don't really understand the construction of the balance sheet as significantly as I might need to. So then the CDFIs will again step in either with a direct assistance in those areas or to bring relationships to the table. And we really didn't talk about that part. Yeah. Part of the gap also is our relationships in our community. Do we know an investment banker? Do we know a banker even? Do we understand that having a financial relationship with a bank is an opening towards other financial services that you might need to know as you expand your businesses? So a lot of times the CDFIs come in and also playing that critical human capital connective role as well.
It's interesting. The Fed does several studies, and one of the studies talks about the number of people who are unbanked and why aren't they banked? Is because they don't trust banks.
Right.
And there's a reason. When you look at the data, it shows that the differential between approval for black businesses in the Deep South is black and Hispanic businesses get denied 47% compared to 30% for white businesses. And those who do get approved, there's about a 20% gap in the amount that they're approved for, and they're not fully funded. And so it's hard to be very extend your trust to institutions that do not respond to you in an equitable way. When I think, let's see, you and I both have served on a partnership with Goldman Sachs. Hope was the third location in the country to be a part of their 10,000 Small Businesses initiative after New York and Los Angeles. And then they came to New Orleans during the Hurricane Katrina to try to help businesses get back on their feet. And that both provides, it engages CDFIs to provide capital that Goldman is not equipped to provide to these businesses, but it also has a entrepreneurship training curriculum that provides excellent advisory services and builds a network, basically a chamber of commerce, and they learn from each other, they mentor each other, just like our group at EBBC. We there's incredible benefit and value from the peer exchange. Muhammad Yunus, who started Grameen Bank, had a peer lending program, and those were many chambers of commerce, 5 small entrepreneurs. They get capital, but they also are tied together and they share information and learn from each other. And Raj Chetty, who is an economist who did some incredible research around economic mobility, one of his follow-on studies talked about the importance of economic social network, the social capitals. Again, the access to a banker, to an accountant, to a lawyer who can help you navigate the economy. And those resources are just not adequately available in the communities that historically that CDFIs serve. And so we have to fill in those gaps, and we do it through some of the ways that Brian mentioned. We do it through partnerships, through, again, we're working with HBCUs to provide some of those services. We engage, we engage the resources and bring them into the communities so that those entrepreneurs are not, so they have adequate, the whole toolkit, because without that, they're not going to be able to grow and create the vital jobs that are necessary in their communities.
This is very anecdotal, but if you go inside any CDFI, expect a 5 to 10 minute conversation. Like, go to a traditional bank. If you walk in, it is literally, what do you want? And you better be ready to make that transaction. And so, to your point, I think the culture of CDFI is truly to be a cultural hub for the community, a resource for the community. So, and I'm being serious. You walk in, hey, how are you doing? What's your family doing? What's going on? I see you have the business down the street. Blah, blah. I mean, it's an elongated conversation.
Well, patronize those businesses.
Exactly. They host events. They're truly community members.
They were the original WeWork.
Right. That's exactly right.
They were the original WeWork.
That's exactly right. And so it's that element of being truly a good neighbor that gives them a vantage point so that they understand what underwriting really can do for a community. But I mean, it's very anecdotal, but there is this thick feeling of membership there that I love with CDFIs.
I think the C is oftentimes not
right.
as prominent as it should be in terms of community. I want to take a moment and ask the members of Extending Black Business Credit to please stand, who are in the room. The EBBC, please stand. Give them a round for they're here. Come on. And we were joking on the prep call that these are folks in the best way possible who've been around for a long time, which means that they're doing the right thing. So thank you. But I want to ask Brian and Bill in particular, CDFIs have been around for a while. People have been talking for a while. What's different about this moment, and why now are we even having this conversation? And I'm going to start with you, Brian.
Well, everything and nothing is different about this moment. And what I mean by that is the structural issues that we were talking about that are the wealth gaps still exist. Even if they're being closed, they still exist in significant amounts in the communities we serve. And what's not different is that we're here to close them. We have developed more techniques. I think we're all better at it. The CDFIs themselves as an industry have grown, and the individual members have grown, which means they have more capital and capability to be able to serve those underlying communities. The other thing that's different now is that really a lot of the levers, just to be frank, are under pressure right now. Remember, I mentioned the various partnerships that a CDFI deploys and employs to serve the small business, Black small businesses in the country. So we talk about the philanthropic side. Well, it's under pressure in terms of how it funds itself and how it funds others, right? We talk about federal and state governments and municipal governments also under pressure, be it financial or be it different value systems that may have emerged, right? And we talk about the corporate community and in a different way also under pressure, particularly as it applies to thoughtful consideration of closing gaps within communities. And so that then means that the CDFIs, well, let's forget the CDFIs, the underlying communities are under pressure, and thus the CDFIs that are serving them. So that's an important thing just to bring up, to be real, in this conversation today about what's different about this moment.
And Bill, as you answer that question, just give us a little bit of insight about the South, because I feel like everybody's rushing to the South. And so one would argue, what happens to you who've been there forever? And why is it important now that those anchor institutions like yourself are even more prominent in some of these national collaboratives to save the South?
You know, I appreciate all the help we can get in saving the South, because when you look at a map of where slaveholding was concentrated prior to the Civil War, and you look at where you have the most challenging socioeconomic conditions, housing stock, bank presence, healthcare outcomes, education outcomes, it is eerily similar to those areas where slaveholding was most concentrated, and that happens to be where you have the highest concentrations of people of color. And so we are at a point where I think we had thought there was a lot of progress made, but it's still just as hard to get approved for a mortgage loan in Mississippi today for a Black person as it was in the 60s before, when redlining was still legal. And so there are these gaps, these disparities that exist. And at a time when there's a huge emphasis on downsizing government, privatizing, well, we can't let the petty lenders and check cashers be the solution. CDFIs have to be positioned to fill in that gap. And traditional banks, we shared the data on the approvals, the denials, who has access, who doesn't. Traditional banks have not stepped in. Until they do, CDFIs play a vital role, and so they have to be capitalized. I think it's really an exciting time. We're seeing incredible growth in our portfolio. We're seeing great partnerships with with the major banks who understand that they don't serve those markets, but the people in communities they serve are vital to their bottom line. They're their workforce, they're their customers, and so they recognize the value of investment. We've had Jamie Dimon in Jackson. Brian Moynihan visited the CDFI Trade Association. He was a keynote speaker, and so they're there because they understand the value of CDFIs. Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Capital One have all visited the Deep South, and it's great that they're interested, and we need to sustain that. And whether this Community Reinvestment Act, you talked about policy solutions. There was a move to modify the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, which is enacted, and it requires banks to reinvest in communities where they benefit. And just because you don't have a bank in a community doesn't mean that you don't benefit. And so I think banks are understanding the importance of CDFIs, and I'm really excited about that. I think philanthropy needs to invest more in the Deep South and in communities we serve. You have $41 per capita philanthropic giving in the Deep South compared to 450 U.S., 4,000 in Silicon Valley, 2,000 in New York, $41 in the Deep South. Mm-hmm. And so we get what we do or don't pay for. Yep. And so we've got to have the investment. We've got to have and part of the infrastructure for delivering and making sure that investment generates the kind of return and targets where the need is greatest is CDFIs.
I just wanted to amplify where you started and where this whole session started, and Bill, your point. We're also at a moment where CDFIs, if you think about them as a unique distribution system, are stronger than ever and recognized as such. Right, so the numbers are up in terms of the number of CDFIs throughout the country. The assets are up in terms of the assets that these intermediaries have. The recognition is up in terms of how CDFIs are serving all across the country. So it's actually a good time to see additional growth. And what we need to work on a little bit is to make sure that the largest gaps where the African American business owners and business communities are truly served. I will say, though, our consortium of 7, 8 CDFIs that are targeting Black businesses also share that same growth, that same scale, that same increase in distribution. So it is an optimistic time in that way. And I just wanted to make sure I put that out.
And what's also is up is the need for local solutions. There's been intense federal retrenchment, and there's no way around this. Communities are going to have to figure out ways to develop wealth. Now, a lot of the federal programs and initiatives that we know have been cut really never touch most of America anyway. And so it's vital that we invest and put attention to the local structures that are working. And that's why this moment in time, CDFIs must meet the challenge, because they have been meeting the challenge.
So we did CDFI 101. What are you? How do you work? I think we hopefully have demonstrated the value of CDFIs, and you've talked about the various ways, the capital stacks, technical assistance. I want to flip it for a second from the supply side to the demand side. So Andre, I want to ask you, you put up a slide. When we think about Black business, I think we tend to think of solopreneurs. So can you talk about what are Black businesses? Who are they? Because what I don't want to have happen is people walk away and go, oh, those CDFIs, they're so cute. And they're just doing everything they can for these little businesses. But there are $1 million businesses that are in this portfolio too. So talk about solo and employer-based businesses.
Yeah, and I mentioned this earlier, that employer firms develop 5 times the wealth as solopreneurs. And Black particular employer firms are concentrated in the healthcare sector, in administrative services, and waste management. Now, what you want to see is an expansion in other fields that we're not necessarily in. But what is clear is that Black business owners, we know how to run businesses in many different sectors. We're just not in the high growth or high revenue sectors as many as we would like. largely because we didn't have the wealth to start with. And in this world, wealth begets wealth. And so that's why this conversation is so important. We have to capitalize in high growth industries. And that's why developers are so important, because the price of entry is just very high. But the price of entry is also high in the EV manufacturing realm and certain tech sectors. And so we're developing businesses everywhere. Most are neighborhood facing, but that's not because of a lack of vision. That's just because the price of entry into these other fields is very high, and we don't have the wealth to lean on to start it.
Bill, did you want to add to that?
No, it is. He hit it on the head. I think there's also opportunities to invest in the ecosystem that supports these entrepreneurs. We are very active in working with historically Black colleges and universities that are anchor institutions in under-resourced communities. There's a large number of municipalities who understand the importance of ensuring there's business growth, and they're held accountable by their constituents, and they understand the importance role that CDFIs play, and they also can open up contract opportunities to help those entrepreneurs grow, and so can the HBCUs. They can buy. They can have contracted vendors that because a business can't survive if they don't have customers.
Right.
And so where are those customers going to come from? And in rural areas and small areas, nonprofits, churches, also in healthcare centers, rural healthcare centers, all need access to capital. And as those safety net programs get cut, they need creative finance. They need capital stacks. Also don't want to, though, diminish the importance of those solopreneurs. When you have 95% of all Black businesses that are sole proprietors, getting them the support they need so that they can provide jobs and have the opportunity to grow when those doors get open to them, and they have the ability to access capital to climb the economic ladder. We want to make sure we make that available to them as well.
Bill's absolutely right. I wanted to your comment of making sure we see the big picture, there's two other areas I just want to highlight. One is business acquisition.
Yeah.
So African Americans are trying to buy businesses as well, but the same dynamics come into play, except that you have an ongoing business as an asset. So this is another area where both our consortium members and in general, we can think about in terms of Black business expansion. It's an ongoing business. I'm going to purchase it and put all of my talent and energy and intellect and experience to work there. Another one that we didn't touch on, we touched upon two component parts of how Black wealth or wealth is created, not just Black wealth, wealth is created, housing and business ownership, right, or real estate and business ownership. Well, guess what? When you have a business that's buying its own real estate,
That's right.
you get a double bang, right? So think about that again also as a wealth creation. Usually they're doing it when they're expanding as well, because so it becomes an employment trigger as well, and then also owning part of your own neighborhood, whatever that might be. So there's the thing about CDFIs that's so interesting. It's not just financing a transaction. It's really thinking about a community and what's our intention toward that community, right? How do we build up that community? And that's why all these different little secret sauce pieces that we're talking about, because it's not just about how do I do this deal. It's like, how do I elevate this community? And that's different.
And just to put some numbers on that, just to accentuate the point, my colleague, Tracy Haddon-Lowe, Lanier Richardson, and I did a study on looking at commercial real estate. About 80% of all commercial real estate is owned by 1% of families in this country. You can go on any main street in this country, and it's generally the property is owned by a few people. And we've also heard of this gray tsunami. All these boomers are going to have to pass on these assets. I mean, well, depending on the tax law.
And their kids don't want it.
The kids don't want it. There is an opportunity to acquire these assets to a more diverse set of owners. And so here lies the opportunity again for CDFIs, making sure not only do we have the financing for mergers, acquisitions, commercial real estate, but also the support that, I mean, when mergers and acquisitions, the issue is really the price of these lawyers around that many folks just can't afford. So there's, going back to the support for the ecosystem, that's also part of what CDFIs can deliver.
So I love that you went there, because one of the things we're doing at the BEA Foundation through our Scale Up program is looking at the different ways beyond just starting a business, right? So there's franchises, you can have your pros and cons. There's entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA. You have a group here in DC, APIS and Heritage, which is going out and buying companies from the silver tsunami folks who oftentimes don't look like us, but turn it into an ESOP. So there's lots of ways to think about that. So the innovation is happening. So now I want us to look forward, because time is ticking. I've got my instructions to stay on tap. We have some questions online. We're going to come to you all if you have questions. So come up with some questions. Let's think forward. What do you see for the next let me say 3 to 5 years? I was going to go with 10, but Lord knows we don't know what's going to happen. So let's just start with 3 to 5. Where do you see the opportunities for CDFIs in this entire ecosystem, and ask each of you for the next 3 to 5 years? And what are the enabling factors required to yield that success?
Well, I said this earlier. I really do believe commercial real estate acquisition is low-hanging fruit. There are sellers ready to sell. There are, and there's willingness to own the businesses, and most Black businesses are neighborhood facing. So so we're not talking about these large buildings in downtowns. We're talking about facilities that barber shops and insurance companies can actually use. And so I think a focus on commercial real estate using many of the shared equity models that we're seeing popping up. I mentioned Lanier Richardson, who's leading on this effort, giving community members the ability to use these SEC, Security Exchange Commission, crowdfunding platforms, so that people with as little as $1,000 can become investors in a development. Now, these things won't generate large dividends, obviously, but it's a way to rally communities and create a new set of accredited investors that we did not have before. So I'm really high on commercial real estate acquisition.
And let me just point that before I go to you, those gentlemen, that then leads to a diversified portfolio.
That's right.
As a finance major, diversity is the key to any successful outcomes. And so I think that's important, that right, these various methods are allowing the Black community to not just be pigeonholed to one thing, but to have the level of diversity that many of our more wealthy neighbors do. Bill?
I was going to lean into that, but I think more broadly, I would just emphasize how we are at a point where CDFIs are known. We've got more than a 30-year track record beyond when the CDFI fund was created, and have demonstrated the important impact and capacity, and not just in the loan funds, credit unions, bank ventures funds. There are fintech CDFIs. There are intermediaries that are creating secondary markets to provide more liquidity, and even that is not enough. But I think what's really important and exciting is the fact that banks, philanthropy investors also have seen the critical role that CDFIs play. And at a time when we're seeing the erosion of safety net programs and the importance of investing in and making sure these communities get the resources they need to prosper, the opportunity and criticalness of collaboration. Seeing more collaboration than I've seen across sectors, independent of what the federal government is doing. And I really think there's opportunity to lean into that, develop those partnerships. Almost a third of the loans that we've done, commercial loans, have had a bank partner. And so we do things that add value to banks, and I think collectively we can move the needle and address these opportunities. Not gaps. The gaps are real, but there are opportunities. These are assets to be developed, and we've got a unique position to tap into that potential right now.
So what's in your crystal ball, Brian?
So it's really interesting. When you first asked, I had to think there for a minute. But I completely agree with my colleagues on the stage. Here's what, there are two different directions. One, during times over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a lot of turmoil, right? And so that doesn't seem that encouraging, except that when you realize that CDFIs are innovation. And in fact, during down periods is when CDFIs have historically grown. That's where they've figured out solutions, particularly if the rest of the market is receding from being concerned about these communities of opportunity that we see that perhaps are not more broadly seen. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time of growth and opportunity for innovation in the CDFI space. The other thing that you also see in, and I'm not forecasting as an economist anything about the next several years. However, if you're nervous, we will see more and more displacement. And that actually, in a way, will fuel business formation. And I think we've seen that in some of the past research. And that provides opportunities, again, for us to step in as people are creating new businesses, taking advantage of years of experience and starting or buying a business, as we were talking about earlier, to stand behind them and to help them take that next step towards real wealth creation.
And I just want to emphasize that point. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Anthony is ready to run to you in his Oprah moment. But the same has been on the demand side, right? We have seen major billion-dollar tech firms happen at the lowest of times. Right. Airbnb, all of those. And so I think that that is true, that when there are deficits or loopholes or opportunities that people are not focused on, right, is the opportunity to get into the market. So you are sitting closest to that person, no, that woman right there. Yes, I'm not trying to have you run up and down, Anthony, although I should. We'll start there and work our way forward because I know we have some other folks on this side. And I don't know what happened to this side, but this side has lots of questions. Please.
Hi, Andrea O'Neill, former investment banker and former federal policy maker. So thank you for your service because I'm working with a lot of you all over the last 4 years. I am running up against what I feel, as you're talking about the conversation, it's still rooted in social good, and that makes some people nervous. And so it's like, how do you almost do some narrative change? So the IRR thresholds and the know your customer stuff and all the things that kind of prevent capital from talking to each other are alleviated. And I wonder if there's ways to both quantify the ecosystem collapse, like what it would mean for the economy or local economies or just big banks generally when CDFIs lose strength, and all of those downstream dislocations that happens when CDFIs go away, or conversely, what is the upstream ROI and the balance sheet protection, all the other kind of ancillary benefits that banks get from being partners with CDFIs, because I think there's still this philanthropic charitable narrative, and now add equity and DEI on top of that, right? Like those are big structural disruptors that are barriers to a lot of the innovation that you're talking about.
So basically the policy wonk wants a soundbite that's going to present the ROI of CDFIs. Okay, go ahead, Brian, you got it?
So I'm not an economist, and this sounds like a research assignment for someone, but I think you're raising the point here. What is the downside of losing this distribution channel, this service channel, right, to the general economy, and what's the upside of keeping it? And there is an answer. I just don't know what that is. I want to go back to the beginning, though. The role of government is also something you phrased in there somewhere. And in a way, there's a question, is it the role of government to be concerned about lifting the entire economy, which is part of what you said, but also looking after those portions of the economy that may not be prospering? You can call that do-gooder if you want, but you could also call it the role of government as well. And again, I know that's not your question, but I just had to say that.
So we're going to go to this young lady right here, since Anthony has a mind of its own, but I put the challenge to Andre with his research hat that you come up with a tagline or a one-liner so that we can answer that question moving forward. Yes, ma'am, please stand up and tell us who you are.
Good afternoon, good morning. Talisha Bakovac with the U.S. Black Chamber. So Brian, we just closed on a $40 million building with City First, so they are talking about it and reading about it.
Real life case study right there,
Yep.
right there.
Former BET campus. So, Andre, you made a good point about the silver tsunami. I wrote a white paper. We published it through the U.S. Black Chamber about the silver tsunami. And you were getting on it about this mixture of debt and equity, because right now you can only get either you can get a up to $5 million SBA loan, 90% debt, or you can be a search funder. You can start you can be an independent sponsor. How do you figure out this equity piece for the 300,000 that have been laid off, et cetera? How do you help them get more confident about going to a $5 million loan, maybe in some equity with the CDFI versus having to go to an investment bank who's going to make them lay off everybody in 4 years and sell the business?
Great question. Which one of you want to take?
That's for Bill, I think.
Yeah. Bill or you, Brian, I think.
Well, I want to give a shout out, a reverse shout out, because the work that CDFIs do on the ground is through their customers, right? And particularly if you're commercially oriented. So she spoke of our support of the U.S. Black Chambers. That's great of what we did, but it's really what are they doing on the ground? Bill spoke about supporting Black-led nonprofits. What's the point there? That if we're able to allow a community facility to increase its capacity, then the community benefits, right? So a lot of it is through the folks who we're financing, right? And that's just too important of a point, at least in the way I approach our work, to leave on the side. Now you get the hard question.
No, I think it's fortunately there are increasing number of Black investors, Black venture funds, and even though they are facing some headwinds, there are an increasing number, and I think they're critical because again because of the wealth disparities, and as a regulated depository, I can only extend so far before my regulators stop me and stop me from doing anything. And so we have to be creative. We're very creative in how we structure our debt. And sometimes it feels like equity, but it can't be equity. And so we are very intentional about trying to find backstops to mitigate it, find partners to step in as investors. But I think, again, like I said, we are akin to a community development investment bank. We will go that extra step to try to structure the right solution for our customers in a way that traditional financial institutions don't. That said, we don't have equity ourselves. There are equity firms that will step in,
But you can take subordinate positions to help unlock
and we do.
equity,
we take
which I know you've done, yes.
We're rarely as collateralized as our regulators would like us to be, but that's just the harsh reality.
And can I just add one thing? One of the things that I struggle with saying, but I have to say this all the time, that we're not going to nonprofit our way out of these problems that we're facing. That at some point, our philanthropic, our venture capital must be directed towards things that are going to develop wealth.
Yes.
And we have to be disciplined about that. And so from a chamber perspective, from a research perspective, it's hard to say, hey, let's prioritize these structural things, the things that derive wealth. But if we keep investing in essentially poverty remediation, it's just not going to go anywhere. Yep. And so for me, the reason why I do talk with philanthropy and other sources of equity essentially is say, please prioritize the things that are going to develop wealth in the long run.
Leverage the capital stacks.
Yep.
So go to your question because time is running.
You're saying you don't want a long preamble?
That's what I'm saying, brother. That's what I'm saying.
You know me, Melissa. See, that's not fair. Calvin Gladney, I'm on the board of the Low Income Investment Fund, one of the national CDFIs. That's my space here. My question is, what's the role of AI and data analytics in both improving the CDFI business model as well as its service to community?
Amen.
It's the same as it is anywhere. It is a tool that we have to master, exploit, and put to use to improve our efficiency, our ability to provide services, our turnaround time, our ability to analyze transactions quicker, and extend that to our customers, to our members, so that they can improve how their performance and their return. Again, we are like our customers. We don't have the resources that our peers have. And so we've got to be smart about improving our profitability, our sustainability, and our ROI, and that of the customers we serve. So we are standing up a digital. We've hired experts in data and technology and digital tools, and we're excited about where that's going to take us in the future.
So I'm sure you're excited, but I want to just prod a little bit. Talk about the building of that AI, because we know right now the inputs are not reflective of facts. And so I'm excited too, but I want to know what data sets you're using. So talk about how your engagement can actually shift the data sets we're working with.
Yeah, two things. First, just from the conservative commercial banking space, I don't know a bank CEO, whether they're a CDFI, community bank, large bank, or MDI, that's not thinking about how AI needs to be in their business for everything that Bill just said. You're raising the huge point. By the way, I think it's today, maybe yesterday, was Banking on Values Day, so I got to put a little plug in for that. And the focus of Banking on Values Day now is around artificial intelligence, and the take I'll take on it is, remember, bad data in, sliced up with smart artificial intelligence will give you bad data out.
Sometimes worse.
It will include the bias that's inherent in the system. So it's really incumbent upon us to really be very thoughtful, as you are, obviously, are, Calvin, to think about what is that data set that we're using. Now, if it happens to be internal, like most folks will be using rather than the third-party data sets, particularly for underwriting and the like, then it's going to be the bias of your institution, which is interesting because I think we're all trying hard to eliminate bias within our own institutions towards our underwriting, for example, which is the kind of the case that most people are, the sexy case, if you will. But then we have to really think about, okay, well, is there bias actually even in our own institutions that then is going to show up as we extrapolate it forward with artificial intelligence? Just 2 cents.
Did you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to just give a shout out to Capital One. We've got 3 projects that we're working on with Capital One around digital and data technology, both to improve our cloud systems, our user experience, and focus on cybersecurity. All things are critical, both for us and protecting our customers. And I don't have the infrastructure to build that. I don't have the balance sheet that Capital One has, but they're making that available to us on a pro bono basis because, again, they understand the important role that CDFIs feel that they don't.
And let's be clear, the importance and ROI and that access to that data. So it is definitely a quid pro quo. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for being here for those watching online. I think the biggest takeaway, hopefully, is that when you hear CDFI, it's not just community development financial institution, but it is communities that provide diverse, flexible instruments to be able to uplift Black business. So I thank you all. I sure did.
That's good.
Thank you all. And I turn it over to our host, Andre Perry.
Please give my colleagues a round of applause. Melissa Bradley, Bill Bynum, and Brian Argrett. Now, I'm just going to close out with a few words. I love citing a research report we did a few years back where we scraped all the Yelp data from businesses all across the country. We control for spending power, education, and the like. And we found that Black, brown, and Asian-owned firms score as high, if not higher, on Yelp than their white counterparts. But they get less revenue in Black neighborhoods. So the perception of the neighborhood was impacting the perception of the business. But what's encouraging about that data is that I always reflect on what my elders used to tell me, and it turns out empirically to be true, that our ice is just as cold. Our ice is just as cold. And we need the financial institutions, the investors, to see that the ice is just as cold. In addition, this is the thing, the headwind we're operating against. We have people who believe investing in one group is taking away from another. That there's this zero-sum thinking, if you will, that when we invest in people who are deserving of that investment, you're going to take away from another community group. The facts are the opposite. When you invest in the people who deserve the investment, it grows that proverbial pie. And so what I'm encouraged by today's conversation is that there are institutions that are focused on growing the pie and providing the investment to the institutions, people, and businesses that deserve it. So again, thank you for joining us. Please, one last round of applause for my panelists. And we'll see you later at the next Brookings panel.